James Morales never expected to become a homeowner at 32, let alone in the prestigious Oakwood Estates. But when his estranged uncle passed away, leaving him a charming ranch-style home, James found himself trading his cramped apartment for suburban life. Among his uncle's possessions was a vintage above-ground pool, a retro 1970s model with striking blue panels that, despite its age, remained in remarkable condition. The pool became James's weekend project, a connection to the uncle he barely knew. After restoring it to its former glory, the pool became the talk of the neighborhood, mostly positive, except for the constant disapproving glares from his next-door neighbor, Patricia Reynolds. A neighborhood association board member with 20 years of residency, Patricia had fought against James's uncle for years over various property disputes. Now, she watched through parted curtains as James, oblivious to the neighborhood's complicated history, revitalized the one thing his uncle had used to spite her, the bright blue pool that was visible from her prized rose garden. On a crisp autumn morning, James began dismantling the pool for winter storage. He just finished draining it when a sharp voice cut through the air. "I've been waiting for this." Patricia stood at the property line, smartphone raised, recording his every move. "Finally caught you in the act of destroying protected property." Confused, James explained he was simply winterizing his pool. Patricia's demeanor shifted from triumphant to outraged as she claimed the pool was a historical neighborhood fixture that required board approval to modify. When James questioned this bizarre claim, Patricia's voice rose to a theatrical pitch. "You're just like your uncle, thinking the rules don't apply to you." As neighbors peeked from windows, Patricia made a show of calling the police, speaking loudly about vandalism of historical property and neighborhood code violations. What Patricia didn't realize was that James, a podcast producer by trade, had instinctively pressed record on his own phone the moment she approached, capturing her increasingly outlandish claims. 2 patrol cars arrived within minutes, unusually fast, James thought, until he learned Patricia's brother-in-law was a retired captain. Officer Reyes approached with a weary expression that suggested this wasn't Oakwood Estates' first neighborhood dispute. As Patricia dramatically presented a folder of evidence, including a document she claimed prohibited modification of any original property features, James noticed movement across the street. His elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who barely spoke above a whisper at community gatherings, was marching toward them with surprising determination, a weathered photo album clutched in her hands. Before James could speak, 3 more neighbors appeared from different directions, including stern-faced Mr. Washington, whom James had never seen smile. "That's enough, Patricia," Mr. Washington called out. "We've all had it with your fabrications." As Patricia sputtered in protest, Mrs. Chen silently opened her album to show Officer Ray's photos chronicling 30 years of neighborhood history, including images of different pools, gardens, and landscape features that had occupied the space where James's pool now stood. The most damning evidence, a photo from last year's Christmas party showing Patricia herself, drink in hand, admitting the pool was that I saw his uncle installed just 5 years ago. As Patricia's claims unraveled, Officer Reyes suggested everyone calm down and handle the matter civilly. But James, podcast producer instincts tingling, sensed there was more to the story. "Why this pool?" he asked the gathered neighbors. "Why is she so obsessed with it?" An uncomfortable silence fell until Mrs. Chen finally spoke. "The property line," she said softly. "Your uncle's survey showed the line is 3 feet into what Patricia claims as her garden. The pool installation proved it." Mr. Washington nodded, explaining that Patricia had been gradually moving her fence line for years, taking inches of property from each neighbor, until James's uncle hired a surveyor and installed the pool precisely on the true boundary line as irrefutable proof. Patricia had been fighting to have the pool declared a fixed neighborhood feature, not to preserve neighborhood character, but to prevent James from ever discovering that her prized rose garden and stone pathway were partially built on his property. As Patricia realized her secret was being exposed to both James and the police, her face paled. "You're all conspiring against me," she shouted, backing toward her house. Officer Reyes, now fully understanding the situation, requested to see the original property surveys. The following week became a whirlwind of revelations. The Neighborhood Association called an emergency meeting where decades of Patricia's manipulations came to light. Falsified complaints, selective enforcement of rules, even altered meeting minutes. James's innocent pool dismantling had pulled the first thread that unraveled Patricia's carefully constructed neighborhood control. The property survey confirmed Mrs. Chen's story. Patricia had encroached on 5 different properties over the years. Rather than pursue legal action, James proposed a neighborhood restoration project. Everyone would correct their boundary lines in the spring, with a community work day to help each affected homeowner. As for Patricia's garden, James suggested creating a community garden in his side yard, where all neighbors, including Patricia, could maintain plots with clear, respectful boundaries. Patricia, faced with potential legal consequences and complete loss of standing in the community, reluctantly accepted the compromise. The following summer, where the vintage pool once stood, James hosted the first Oakwood Estates community barbecue. Complete with a temporary pool for the neighborhood children, Patricia made a brief appearance, offering a plate of her award-winning brownies, her first step toward redemption. As James looked around at his new friends and community, he couldn't help but think his uncle had left him far more than just a house with a quirky pool. He had given him the chance to heal a neighborhood and, in the process, find a real home.